Men rising up to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. So, this very interestingly titled, very, how shall I say, it's kind of an intense title, right? So, Jai, how did that come about? What was your thought process?
Hi, everyone. So the subject matter is basically the gay experience, and particularly the religious or spiritual gay experience. And the way I came up with the title was that in the secular world, to be gay is not man enough. And I put man deliberately in air quotes because it kind of needs to be unpacked. What do you mean when you say man? Especially
Mm,
nowadays when people are confused about those simple two categories, man and woman. And here in the States, they can't even define woman very clearly anymore. So, what does it even mean to be a man when you're having that sort of psychosexual conditioning as such? And I know some people will be triggered by calling it a conditioning. We'll try to clarify that later. And then I put God's deliberately in air quotes also because in the religious world, you're not, even if you become a devotee, like in our context, or a religious person, then the gay thing is out. And so in
mm,
God's eyes, you're not considered good enough. And I put God's eyes in air quotes because it's not necessarily the God that you encounter in the religious text, like the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is decidedly unconcerned about the psychophysical conditioning of the souls. And such verses like Samoham Sarvabhuteshu Name Dvaishosti Napriya. He doesn't favor the conditioned souls. He's not against them. Anyway, he's just neutral. Only those who have bhakti for him are they able to catch his attention. So that's kind of the God that we encounter in, say, the Bhagavad Gita. But the presentation of God that we get is the sort of socially constructed image of God,
mm,
which is
mm.
decidedly preoccupied with all the minutia of the conditioned soul's life. And so if you're doing, if you're gay, you're more importantly, you're acting gay. Because I always like to say, I'm like the neutered gay. I'm like the gay that everyone likes because, I'm the gay that hasn't done gay shit. So that's, as far as everyone knows, as far as my public persona is concerned. So I'm like the neuter. Okay, you can be gay as long as you don't do gay. So you're in the religious world, the gay thing is not, it's at best tolerated and not really accepted. And this is presented as, well, that's against God or is against God's
Mm.
laws. And in the secular world, the religious thing makes you an outsider. And it also makes you not man enough. So that's how I came up with the title, Not Man Enough, in God's eyes, and God's in air quotes representing the vision of the social
Mm,
concept
mm,
of God as given to us by devotees who may be, neophyte, to say it frankly, in
mm,
their
mm.
understandings of things. So that's how I
Yeah,
came
and
up with the title. I thought it was clever. It came as a stroke of inspiration, just the night of when I sent this. So
that's yeah. I think it's really on point. And I just now, very importantly, I feel like a very rude host. We have with us our dear friend Kishore Chandra. He's been
it's
with
like
us on the
Kishore like
podcast.
kind of is known, like, and also Kishore and I are always like together doing stuff. So it didn't even feel like, and he also does podcasting. So it's just like, yeah, everyone knows us. Why do we need to
Okay, we don't want to get excessively familiar here. There's still like an etiquette of hosting,
Yes,
Jai.
of
So
course.
anyway,
Definitely.
welcome, Kishore. We're super happy to have you with us. You've been on once or twice before, right in the beginning, like close to the beginning. You were there for the porn conversation. No, what was it? The porn conversation, or was it the one after that about vows? I don't remember.
I think it was the porn conversation.
Okay, anyway, so Kishore is here. Kishore had, as a person who has had a very real journey in this way, being a gay man, coming to the bhakti way of life with its very black and white ideas of right and wrong, and where this anomaly of a person in a male body having a homosexual sort of orientation, it's a really tough thing to navigate in a religious context. So we would also very much like to, and as we progress, we will unpack Kishore's personal experience of going through that journey and now coming to a point where he's truly integrated, where he's truly at least from what I see and feel, where you've really fully accepted yourself for who and what you are, and where your community has also very much. So yeah, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, Jai. So you had that idea of just unpacking, like, where was the point of knowing? Yes.
Yeah, let's start there. Kishore, when did you find out? You go first.
Oh my god, I love that we're starting with this point because it's such a silly point. I feel it's simultaneously important and also silly because it's like
Well, I guess more important than when did we find out? What was the experience of finding out?
Yeah, that's more important.
That's the more kind of important question.
Yeah, that's the more important question because I guess my mind was going towards like, this is such a silly question, but people do ask that question a lot.
Right.
Because it's, the way that I see it is like, well, how did you know that you were straight? Like, how did you know that you liked girls? It's like, you just know. It's like all of a sudden things start happening, and as such, we don't need to get into specifics. But I think that for me, the experience of knowing and then how other people perceived me around it was very intense. I don't know if you know this about me, Karuna Avatar, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And
I think I did hear you say that before, but yeah, like, shit.
Yeah. So I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness in like a super traditional, all Spanish speaking congregation where it's like we're hearing this as children, like homosexuality is bad, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And so I remember when I first started to have the notions of like and the thing is that like I didn't even put words to it back then. It's just an attraction or something that starts to happen, or you look at someone in a certain way. I remember like the immediate feeling that I felt, which is sad, is like, secrecy and shame, and like no one can ever know about this. Like I am going with this secret to my grave with this, and it was interesting because I was raised in that environment, and I think a lot of people go through this, that if something is quote unquote abnormal or variant to what is seen as normal, it's interesting, and we can get into this later, but I think when I was growing up, maybe Jai, you have a similar experience. It's like don't shout it from the rooftops, and it's so interesting how the experience now has like totally shifted on its head. Now it's like, this is a badge of honor and you have to tell everyone. And if anyone ever offends you, it's homophobia immediately. And it's just like been turned on its head. So for me, it's been really interesting to see the experience change in a matter of like, 25-ish years. But that was my experience. My experience was not a good one. Like I knew, and then I immediately was like, no one needs to know about this, and I'm going to pretend until I can continue.
Let's take it. I'm going to tell my story too, but let's take it one step further. Same question in the same direction, but when people who were important to you or who constituted your community at the time, when they found out, what was the experience?
The experience was not good. The experience was an immediate shutdown. It was an immediate, you're possessed by a demon. It was an immediate, this has to change. Like, this is not allowed. And,
wait, is it too personal because I know the story, and the story is kind of funny.
Oh my God.
I don't know if you want to share that. Maybe
Jai, you have this way of like finding things funny that are
it's called trauma. That's how it's. I don't know if it's like a person of color. I hate that word, but it's like a Black thing. Like when we're traumatized, we just transform it into comedy in order to digest it. I definitely have that hard where I just transform everything into comedy so I can deal with the tragedy of the situation. Yeah. But his story is actually quite kind of funny. If it's
which part of it?
Like your mom finding out.
Oh my God. Okay, fine. I'll tell that. That's too tragic. So I never actually like came out of the closet to my family. They found out, which is like, as we refer to, like being thrown out of the closet, because I had a high school boyfriend in freshman year. And it was funny too, because it was a secret from everyone. I also had a pretend fake girlfriend that I made up.
We called them beards.
And everyone was totally convinced. And I think it was really interesting in regards to the title of being man enough. I grew up in a very like masculine, machista kind of Latin environment of like, this is what it means to be a man. And I think one of the worst things that I was dealing with of the fear of coming out or of people finding out is that I would be diminished as a man, or they wouldn't see me as a man anymore. And that did happen. My parents found out, and once like people at school found out, that's immediately what happened. And so yeah, I wrote a Valentine's Day letter to my at the time high school sweetheart, and I accidentally left a copy of it on the printer at home.
Oh my God, bro.
It was bad. It was like bad. It was like full detail, about life together and all this stuff. And I remember my mom like picking me up one day at school being like, we need to talk about something. And it all exploded from there. But it was interesting because that was the biggest fear, actually, now that I remember, from my father, from other men in my life, in the congregation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, of being seen as not a man, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that sorry, Jai. Do you have a quick comment, because I have something to say.
I was going to share my particular story with this.
Okay. You go.
You think it's appropriate?
John.
I had an intuition about it at 7. Actually, I always share this, that I remember watching this movie called Philadelphia, and the actors were Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. It's a 90s movie. I'm a 90s kid. And in the movie, Tom Hanks' character plays a gay man who's like afflicted with AIDS, but there's some court case going on, and Denzel Washington is his lawyer representing him. And I don't remember all the details of the movie. I just remember identifying viscerally with Tom Hanks' character and thinking, because Tom Hanks has died from AIDS, this is my future. Like, I remember having visceral feeling like that as a 7-year-old kid. So not having the language around like gay or sexuality even fully articulated, albeit my mom she never hid sex or sexuality from us. So we had like natural questions that came up in the course of observing things in the world. If we asked her a true question, she would give us a true answer. So it wasn't like something that was completely hidden from me, like the world of sex and sexuality. But I didn't have a word for it, but I just knew that I was like Tom Hanks' character, like viscerally, like in my bones. And I thought that was going to be my future. And
so you were basically like, I am destined to get AIDS and die a premature death.
It was like a visceral feeling.
That's a common thing, by the way. Like I'm not going to put myself out there, but like, I remember one time I got a cut, and like someone else's, like, somehow or another, actually this happened quite recently.
Yeah, I remember that.
No. Actually, I didn't get a cut. I thought I got a cut, and this might be a little TMI or gross, but like, when you get a cut on your finger, like maybe a visceral response is to like suck the cut or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
I did that all the time. I did that, and then the blood came off, and I realized that it wasn't my blood, and I completely freaked out. And it's like, on a logical level, I know that that's not how you get HIV. I know this and whatever, but I feel like it's been so ingrained into gay people, especially gay men, that like, you're going to die of AIDS. I remember seeing that movie when I was a kid too. And I was just like, this is why I have to live in secrecy and can never do anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
So then, of course, that was 7. Then when puberty hits around 11, then it becomes self-evident. I always say that, men, particularly, we have pointers indicating the nature of our attraction. And so, and then of course the immediate experience is dissimulate. Like, no one can know because you won't be considered a man, or you're not man enough. And of course you'll be bullied. When I was, of course, by 7th grade, I already had begun dancing. So dancing was considered like a very feminine sort of thing. It wasn't considered like an athletic thing, which it totally is, especially the form of dance that I was doing. And so I started getting bullied for being gay before I even really had the words to articulate what I was going through, or that sort of transition. But people didn't really know because I never had a relationship. Like, I intentionally avoided engagement with relationships because, I mean, they just look like mutual exploitation agreements, even that time before I was a devotee. And so I kind of intentionally shied away from participation. And I'm sure there's elements of shame that played a role in that. But there was also elements of being like a romantic, and there should be something like genuine and something true and real. And I'm totally a romantic in that sense. So the combination of like shame and a romantic vision of what a relationship should be kept me from participating in any relationships whatsoever. And of course, I had my chance to get, you could say, down and dirty or get into trouble, but I resisted it because it was like, nope, it has to be pure. Of course, my understanding of pure was not, Shuddha Bhakti, but the understanding of pure was like meaningful and something that would last a lifetime. That was my understanding what pure was. And so with that sort of puritanism in my mind, I resisted it. And then I joined the Hare Krishna movement, and I built my identity around being a brahmachari, and like my identity around my spirituality, which was practical because that's what I was actually doing. And I resisted like revealing that to the outside world. We'll maybe come to this in the future when we come to anecdotes, but I definitely dissimulated that part of me because it really played no practical element in my practical life as a brahmachari. And it wasn't until I actually did Namras's podcast about 4 years ago that I had, you can say, a coming out experience. There were some friends who knew just by dint of being around me. They just knew without it even being like something that we had a conversation about. It was just like, yeah, this, and it wasn't a thing. But a lot of friends didn't know. So I remember when we did the podcast with Namras, I was very hesitant because I was like, I don't know, once this comes up, and this is generally an experience that gay men, I think, and women, but especially gay men, have this issue. Like, once people find out, that can mean losing friends, that can mean losing families, it can mean a total loss of identity that was important for you at a particular point in your life. So I was actually a little bit nervous in doing that episode with Namras because I was like, so many of my friends and so many people who have respect for me, they just don't know because I've never represented that side of my conditioning or personality to the public or to anyone. If you knew, you knew, but otherwise I wasn't like talking about it. I wasn't joking about it, nothing. But finally I had the balls to just do it because I was thinking about others like me in the movement who may find some respite or some sort of palliative in such a conversation, and that they weren't alone in their particular experience, which is often the feeling of being just alienated and isolated. So that was kind of like my coming out experience. And of course, the experience of that was largely positive. I was getting a lot of support from sannyasis even. And my mom later on saw the podcast also. And so she was like, I remember going home to visit her, and she was like, Jai, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, Mom, really? Like, you didn't know? And she was like, actually, yeah, and then she was like, yeah, there were actually signs I kind of did know. But she said, well, why didn't you mention it to me? I said, well, there was no reason to mention it to you. I had told myself that if I got into a practical relationship, then at that time I'll have like a proper coming out with family and friends or whatever. But
so that was actually, hold on, quick interjection. That was the first time, when you were like in your mid 30s, where you actually overtly said, and your mom like directly heard,
yes,
like you never had a conversation about it.
Never.
Damn,
it seemed
bro.
irrelevant because it just didn't play any practical role in my practical life.
Yeah. Jai, I have one question, and you can just like, shut me down immediately if you feel like it's TMI. But like, I'm just fascinated by this almost kind of like asexual thing, where you had this very Brahminical vision, like this thing has to be romantically like, real, meaningful, etc. And it just feels like so much exploitation in the gay world, so I'ma just avoid it, But then, bro, you're in the ashram for like 14 years. You're sharing like very close, intimate space with a bunch of other dudes. I mean, I've heard from other gay devotee men, like it's hella hard living in the ashram because you're like seeing like pretty, not guys that aren't dressed, So it's like, bro, like how did that work? I just yeah, I just can't imagine that, you know.
In my particular case, Krishna made an arrangement that I was always had a room by myself.
Mm.
Um, and the first 2 years of my devotional life, I was trained by a devotee. His name was Revati Nandana Prabhu, and he happened to be a gay man also, which I didn't find out until after he was leaving his body. Actually, and he left his body due to AIDS, and the AIDS came because at one point he was using drugs also, and he had contracted AIDS virus from sharing needles. There was a dark period in his journey in Christian consciousness before I met him in Chicago. And then after he left his body, I basically ended up in the ashram by myself for a few years before a lot of younger men started joining. And by that time, I was like senior enough to have my own space. I had been in the ashram long enough that I had my own space. And so I largely, in that sense, I was like kind of protected. And it also may come as a surprise, but every man isn't attractive to every gay man. You know, it's kind of like a common stereotype. And that if you're a man, then of course there's always a risk. I'm not saying that isn't a risk, but gay devotee men are usually not it because they have a lot of stuff that they have to go through in their sort of individuation on a human level. And
Kishore, with you nodding to that, I just want to hear, like, what is your interpretation of that statement? Like, how do you hear
his
that?
interpretation is full agreement.
Yes, my interpretation is full agreement about that statement because I've had personal experience with that. Even though it somehow ended up, and I can speak about this later, it somehow ended up that, you know, my partner is a devotee. Fiance is a devotee. However, right before him, I kind of was like, I'm done with like dealing with all the, you know, convolutedness and the confusedness of it is a lot. We can get into maybe the psychology about it a little bit later, but I think when one has a different sexuality and you're so, you know, in an institution, it can play a number on the mind, unfortunately.
Yeah. So in essence, there's just a lot of like psycho-emotional fragmentation and, like, you know, serious identity issues, just like a whole lot of baggage and stuff to deal with. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. It's a great way of putting it.
Gotcha.
So it becomes
Jai.
unattractive. That's the point. It's like unattractive. Unless you have come to terms with what you are as you stand, like what you are empirically, and you're able to bring that, as embarrassing or humiliating as it may be, before God. You know, and then from that sort of true platform, you reach for the true. Then it seems it's very hard to have any sort of genuine connection with someone who is still embracing something that is untrue. Even empirically speaking. Now, I think the way that devotees get around this in general, and certainly the way that a strategy a gay person might apply in this regard is, well, I'm not the body. And so I don't have to worry about building any sort of identity on the empirical level because that isn't ontologically true. And so that becomes sort of an escape strategy of having to face the empirical or the word of Vyavaharika, the empirical existence. One way you can kind of skirt around that is just to dismiss it as not being logically true and build your identity around spirit. And then that's where a lot of the complications come up on a sort of psychophysical sense. And I think also ends up impacting spiritually also.
Yeah, because as we've seen, whether gay or straight, that kind of strategy or approach is highly unsustainable and doesn't work for like 97% of people. There comes a certain point where you have to deal with your, you know, particular conditioning of this. I love Jai's term, psychophysical apparatus. You know, like you got to deal with the fact that you are in this body and that you still have to deal with its inclinations for decades and decades to come through all the times and tidings of this life. So that ends up not working. And then there comes a certain point where, specifically in the gay context, like it's like, I really have to face this thing now, but the society like overtly does not provide safety in that regard, you know? So you have to like find these pockets. I mean, Jai, how many letters have you received from gay devotees who just like are struggling with so many issues and just feel like they have nobody to come to, right?
Well, probably not as many as Kishore, even, honestly, because
Mm,
Kishore is more overtly out on his in terms of his persona on social media. So he's gotten a lot of letters. I'm a little bit more until very recently. I'm a little bit more reserved, I guess, in representing that part of my persona in the public space. But as I've become more um, out there with that, then the letters have been quite a few and mostly tragic. And some of them are kind of hilarious just from my way of processing traumatic things. But yeah, largely it's pretty tragic because again, you're not good enough for the secular world, you know, because you're not man enough. You're not good enough for the gay community because you're too godly. They like gays and God somehow right now ain't mixing for, you know, as a cultural zeitgeist sort of thing. This is not like all gay men are irreligious or secular, but largely speaking. And then you finally come to Krishna for refuge, and you're not good enough for the communities there for various social reasons as well. And so the net experience is a feeling of utter alienation from everything and everyone. And so then, yeah, it becomes an interesting challenge.
I feel like we're, you know, we've kind of to some extent set the scene, and I'm really really eager to take a deep dive right now. So why don't we start with the God issue, right? Because when we really get down to the essence, the only thing that truly matters is if Krishna accepts you as a worthy giver of your love. When Krishna is a willing recipient of your love, that is the only thing that matters. If God is not judging, who is any individual or institution or temple or anyone? Who's anyone to judge? So I think like that's a really good starting point. God's true disposition in this regard. Does he accept us, you know, in these bodies, whatever our conditioning may be, just as we are? And to me it just seems like it would be absolutely absurd to assert the contrary, that God's acceptance of us is conditional. How could it be?
All right, Kishore, you go first.
I agree with you. I mean, I feel that Krishna loves me as I am unconditionally.
You're wrong.
And I think that as things become culturally institutionalized, there's a greater danger of cultural norms clouding over certain philosophies, because the philosophy is really clear. You know, the philosophy is really clear. We're all conditioned jivas. We all are trapped inside these material bodies. We've all had so many past lives and have this accumulation of karma, and we're living out that karma now in these bodies. So we have these bodies for a reason. I have this body with this conditioning for a reason. And it is what it is, right? And so that's like very simple and very clear in a sense. Then whether or not God loves me, you know, I've been speaking about this idea a lot. I know Jai likes to speak about it a lot. Is this idea of God is always there. Krishna is always there. And the root problem being that we are turned away from Krishna, and that Krishna is just waiting for us to turn back to him, turn towards him. And it's like bhakti in a sense then becomes really simple. Of course, it's also very complex, but it's also really simple. God is always there. We have an unending relationship with Krishna, and we're turned away from him because we're afraid that we're not going to get love from, you know, all the material things that we're pouring our love into, and we forget about Krishna. And the simple solution is to turn towards Krishna. I think the problem becomes then, when we see, because in our society, well, don't go directly to Krishna, first Radharani, and then first, first Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then Guru, actually go to Guru first, and actually go to the disciples of the Guru first. And even before you go to the disciples of the Guru, like, just speak to the community. Don't read that book. It's too advanced for you. It's too esoteric, like this. And so then the problem becomes, if I am putting my faith in, let's be real, fallible people, like we're trying to be devotees, but we're still fallible. If I'm putting my absolute faith in that person, and I'm not talking about gurus, I'm talking about just members in our community and how they guide us, then I might be misguided, and I think that that's where issues start to come about. I remember when I first met the devotees, I was 21. And by then my identity as like a gay man was pretty solid. I was just like, I was never like a party person. I was always always believing in God. It was very clear to me that when I left my religion, that, they just had something off, it seemed like some crazy offshoot of Christianity. And it was just like, this is just, you guys are wrong, because this is hate. Like, what you guys are practicing is hate. And so, but I never gave up on God. I always felt that God was there, always felt that God was in my heart. And I went on a search. And I remember I met the devotees in India when I was living there, when I was 21. But it was very interesting because I was hyper aware and like hyper vigilant. And as gay people, you start to develop that, unfortunately, like hyper vigilance of like, is this a safe space? Is it not a safe space? Am I going to get attacked? Am I not going to get attacked? And you learn to always be looking. And I remember one of the first ISKCON temples that I visited, it was in Bangalore. And I found out later that it was Ritvik, or it is. And I remember feeling like so connected to Krishna. And I really loved the kirtan, and I loved everything. I loved the prasad. They gave me Bhagavad Gita. They gave me Japamala, all of this stuff. But I immediately felt like unsafe, like this is not a place where I can be like, hey, everyone, by the way, I'm gay, and I just wanted to let you all know that, and I immediately felt like, no, this is not a place where I can say that. This is not a place that feels safe to say that. And so because a lot of people do reach out to me, whenever people reach out to me, I always tell them, like, your love and faith in Krishna is separate from the institution. This is something that Jaya has told me, and I truly believe it. My love and my faith in Krishna is not dependent on the institution. And I always tell them, I'm just like, you need to find a safe place and a safe space. Like, you need to find a place where you're not going to be told that you're evil, or that you should
100%.
You should never ever have a partner, or you should just be celibate your entire life and just be a eunuch for the rest. It's like, to find a place that like says like, hey, we appreciate you, we love you. And whenever I speak, and I'll end with this, whenever I speak to people, I always tell them, because I think it's really important. When I first found the Bhakti Center, I already knew the devotees. I had met them on various occasions. And that was the first question I asked, actually, to the then executive director. I was like, is this a safe space? Like, can I was joining a men's group. So I was also like, kind of like, a men's group reading sacred texts. And I was just like, is this a safe space? Like, this is my situation. This is my conditioning. This is who I am. And the answer that I received was one full of love and acceptance, and just like, yeah, please come. We love you no matter what, And so I always urge people, even though it's very difficult to find that in our movement, I think it's more now. And I urge people to always find that at whatever cost.
Yeah, I just want to say to that, I don't remember. Oh, yes, it was Hridaya Nanda Maharaj, who I don't remember his exact words, but he basically said, like, you cannot expect the society/institution to provide you with a community. It is your responsibility to find a community, a resonant community within the greater context of the society. You cannot expect to feel at home at every temple that you visit. You cannot expect to get along with everybody. It's like, that is up to you to find. And that is really the essence of what is going to give a person a sense of belonging in a greater spiritual society. So yeah, but it's like, for you guys, like in the gay context, it's like, it seems, at least externally, that you guys are in the minority, perhaps in the greater society too, but like you guys are in the minority, and then because it's such a taboo in the Krishna conscious society, it's like, there's even less, and maybe a lot of people who have that conditioning, but who have just never had the courage to say anything about it, So like my curiosity here is, right now, if a gay guy who has not yet found community for himself in the greater spiritual society, who's serious about his spiritual life, where does he go? I mean, obviously it depends on country, but like, let's talk about America. Like, how does a person like that actually proceed?
And I have an answer to the previous question, and I'll intertwine it with the question that you've just answered. I think devotees, and in general, are very good at expressing the God conception. And I'm going to go back to this verse. This is a general representation of the God that we hear encounter in Bhagavad Gita. Samoham sarvabhuteshu namedvesho sinapriya. So this is as far as God's relationship with the psychophysical dimension. He looks upon it with an eye of neutrality. He's not favoring someone because of certain psychophysical karmic inheritance, nor is he against anyone because of that. Do your thing. He's got the laws of nature that's taking care of that whole psychophysical dimension. Ye bhajanti tumam bhakta mayite teshu chapyaham. But those who do my bhajan with devotion, then I'm in them because of attachment to them, and they are in me because of attachment to me. Mm-hmm. Because of the mutual attachment, we are with one another. This is the general concept of the God that we encounter in Bhagavad Gita. And so Krishna's concern is with devotion and not with the psychophysical conditionings of those who have devotion. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is just one of the best literatures for presenting the reality of that truth. You can say the Bhagavatam has something like a reverse theology, because in many of the stories, what would be ideally the good in an empirical sense gets turned up on its head. And the person who is in the bad position empirically turns out to be the more exalted person spiritually. The most common example that comes to mind is Vitrasura, which is what the Bhagavatam is made for. Indra is in the mode of goodness position because he's a devotee, and Vitrasura is a demon because in the lower gunas. And yet Vitrasura is more exalted because of his bhakti. And even in one Prabhupada, it is Indra who's actually the demon, and Vitrasura who's a devotee because of his devotion. And so something about devotion turns the whole empirical world upside down in a sense. What is normally bad can be good. What is normally good can be bad in a particular context. That is true, of course, of the relative world, and certainly true even when it contacts spirit. And so it's the bhakti point that's the important point, and not the psychophysical inheritance. I think devotees are very good at representing that concept. No matter where I've gone, I feel like I've encountered that sort of God. But the complication comes that in the society, there is an intersection between spiritual and social. This is the international, like for us, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So there's an intersection between society and Krishna consciousness. So now the question comes, how do you best facilitate a society where the culture of Krishna consciousness can be cultivated? So when it comes to that question, different devotees have different understandings about what makes a proper social society. And that's when these complications come up, especially for persons who don't fit a particular social mode. Then that's where this dilemma will come up. Now, as individual souls, we require a sense of belongingness. So as much as we can say, well, at the end of the day, it's about our relationship with God, it's about devotion to God. No soul in this world, especially in the novice stage, is strong enough to stand on his own 2 feet without the support of community, basically. And when we say the support of community, we mean devotees who are properly situated in some sort of spiritual practice, and therefore by the influence of the internal energy that's coming from that practice, you're held up so that you can participate in the culture of bhakti. And just the empirical need to feel belongingness. So then you're trying to reach for Krishna, and it's just about the bhakti part. Everyone's saying that. No one has any issue with that. But now it's the society part that's built up around that, that's supposed to lift you up to be able to practice
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
all the complications come. And
Yeah.
so with that intersection, that's where you find people, well, that's where you find a conflation of spiritual values and social values. And so something like, for example, I'll just give you a very common example of a conflation of social value and spiritual value. Prabhupada has taught us to follow the 4 regular principles and chant 16 rounds. So the 16 rounds is the spiritual part, and the 4 regular principles is the social part. It's the social part means it's pertaining to the Brahminical culture, one of these social archetypes for our outstanding social culture known as Varnashram.
Yeah.
So, but now following 4 regular principles has become tantamount to being spiritual. And so if you're not performing well on that social front, then you're not considered to be performing well or able to participate honestly in the culture of spirituality. And even when you bring up the issue of like, well, hey, wait a minute. I thought Anarjana Vritti comes after Bhajana Kriya. Like, purity is the sequel to bhakti and not the prerequisite. But because of the relation of social values and spiritual values, now somehow or other it's become the prerequisite for bhakti. So if you're not following, 4 regular principles, for example, if you're not fitting the social mold, then you're not actually performing bhakti proper. And so now you're living in a community where you realize like, okay, I'm not fitting the social mold. Therefore, I'm not really practicing bhakti. And therefore, without this sense of belonging, without this sense of a community where you're getting at least some of the rays of the internal energy. I mean, they may be doing shnick, shnick, ram, ram, may not be very potent, but if there's enough people doing shnick, shnick, ram, ram around you, you get a little influence of the internal energy to hold you up. But if you're not able to meet that social mode, which they find to be important for you to participate in their community, then naturally you feel alienated and you have to go. And so my experience of gay devotee men, particularly, because that's where I have most relationships with, they actually just go to a place where they can be socially accepted. And so they end up losing, for the most part, they end up losing their spiritual life, at least for a time. So navigating, it's that intersection of spirit and matter that happens in the international society for Krishna consciousness, where things are getting like kind of confusing. I don't think any devotee would deny the first part, but how you should live the social part, that is where, there are a lot of opinions. And
Jai, I'm so glad that you're saying all of this, because my mind was thinking in a very similar direction, and I'd like to share those thoughts. But Kishore, first, do you have any pertinent thoughts that you'd like to share right now?
No,
just to what Jai has said.
To what Jai has said, like this is we were joking before the podcast, like this is what he and I talk about all the time, and it's I think it's really important to understand this aspect of society, of culture, of there being a lot of opinions out there. And like you said, Karuna Avatar, which I really appreciated, like not everyone's going to agree with your opinions, and not everyone's going to think that building the society in X way is the best way. I think what then becomes a problem, and maybe we can come back to this later, is what Jai articulated, that then what tends to happen with a lot of gay people is that they leave the society or take distance from the society to go somewhere where they are able to, be themselves and have breathing room around this. And I think that I think the fact that our international society doesn't really have places for gay people to go and feel accepted in general, that's a really big problem, and it's a really missed opportunity, because then gay culture, which is a whole nother topic,
I'm gonna get to that.
Gay culture is extremely, it's extremely arresting, let's put it that way. So if there's a devotee who is feeling like they don't fit, they don't belong, this society doesn't welcome them, etc., and they're going to the gay culture where they feel accepted, it can, I've also heard from devotees that have gone, and it can be extremely traumatizing as well. So it's like, now it's like almost like a three-pronged situation. It's like, I'm not welcome in the spiritual world, I'm not welcome in the straight hetero world, and I feel like an alien in the gay culture world because I have this spiritual side of me that I don't want to let go of. And it's like it's even taken to a further point of like where do I even belong, you know? And that's where people will reach out in extreme distress because of this.
Oh my God, yes. You know, Jai, just to what you were saying, you know, this very, very tricky cross section where the spiritual meets the social. You know, this is something that we see with institutionalized religion across traditions. You know, there, I think of the common saying that I would be a Christian if it wasn't for the Christians, right? I would be a follower of Christ if it wasn't for all of those things, all the judgment, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I you know, so like beginning to explore some potential solutions, I would like to bring up what I believe to be a fundamentally problematic philosophical approach related to our social culture. So it's like, you know, in so many different contexts, we can always either see the glass as being half full or half empty, right? We can emphasize the positive versus the negative. And I feel like in our society, our social culture is primarily obsessed, like literally obsessed with all the things that you should not do. And that in essence is not the primary thing. That is a secondary thing. The primary thing is, how enthusiastic do you feel to cultivate your loving relationship with Krishna? What do you feel inspired to do for Krishna with the devotees out of a place of love? That is all that matters. You know, Jai, speaking also to our conversation last week, right? Like spontaneous inspiration, the desire to connect with God. That is what matters. And yet our social culture is so fanatically obsessed with, if people do not tick these boxes perfectly, we have no place for them. And obviously, that is a social culture that needs to change, because otherwise gay devotees will never have a place. They may find certain like pockets, certain communities that may welcome them, you know, but it's like, it can't be just that. It's got to be more. Because then I will also say that this whole debacle in principle applies not only to queer people but also to anyone who doesn't strictly fit the mold. You know, I feel like it applies to me. To be honest, I steer clear from, like, you know, very official ISKCON spaces because I feel really viscerally uncomfortable, because I feel like I cannot express myself naturally in the way that I need to as an authentic human being, as an individual, as a person, right? Because body or soul, the essence is personhood. And so it's like we need a space, you know, that welcomes us, where our personhood can manifest in whichever way we feel is necessary to our, you know, conditioning. Now, obviously, certain lines have to be drawn. You know, we have the regulative principles for, you know, good reasons. And but let us just articulate that in essence. It's like, if you indulge in certain things excessively, your consciousness will not be sufficiently clear to, you know, it wouldn't be a fertile ground to cultivate the desire to connect with Krishna. So they have their place, but it's like, we cannot get caught up on the kind of sex that a person chooses to have or feels inclined to have. People are going to have sex. They've had sex since time immemorial. God damn it. They're going to keep doing it. It's like, Jai, I'm remembered of Sadananda Maharaj's piece, right? It's like, if there is repression, what can repression accomplish? Because the only thing it will result in is like a miserable, you know, like state of mire and a desire to sneak away. That is going to happen inevitably. You know, it's like, anyway, rant over for now.
I have a few things to say to that. Number one is that I have no idea how to arrange a social culture in a way that the most amount of people will be benefited. I don't even have an answer to that conceptually, what to speak of practically. And I think that societies or institutions getting it wrong is totally fair. And that they got it wrong, I can't even say confidently that they have gotten it wrong necessarily. Like I know in the millennial Gen Z generation, we're kind of like fried with traditional structures of things. But I'm just like, okay, guys, let's be a little real here, a little bit honest with ourselves. These traditional structures lasted for millenniums. That's a long ass time. Whereas the sort of like, let's just be free culture that we see today is literally a post World War II experiment. And it's not even been 100 years and this shit is falling apart. So at least for me, when I'm looking at the social world right now, I'm like, I don't know. These traditional people, like, I think they might have had a point. I mean, if they can hold out a culture for millenniums together with a certain sort of structure, there's something to that. And I feel that a lot of the younger generations, we kind of pull the trigger too fast and take a revolutionary approach on these old systems without fully understanding them and without fully understanding the implications of removing certain parts of those structures. And I can at least speak for myself. I certainly don't know the wisdom behind why a social structure should be put in this particular way as opposed another way. Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad Gita about himself being the giver of the social culture known as Varnashram Dharma. So I'm going to take it that that's the best social culture this world can have. You know, even with all the defects that comes with being part of the material world, there can be no superior culture than the culture that's given by God himself, if Bhagavad Gita is to be taken true. And so the archetypes that emerge out of that culture, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, the certain duties that pertain to those archetypes, and that is perfect. I don't know how it's perfect. I don't exactly know why it's perfect, but I have enough faith in the words of Bhagavad Gita and Christian that this is the perfect system. And before I take a revolutionary stance against it, I would have to understand in a much deeper way all the implications of removing this part and that part and the other part and the other part. I think so my point there is that social societies or institutions can get it wrong. Like, yeah, of course we can get it wrong. That's obvious. This is like a very epic thing. It's such an epic or such a large thing to do that God himself has to be the one that gives the culture that can really be sustainable over millenniums. I think where we could do a lot better, whether it's this system or some other system, I think where we're failing to have an institution is more focused on personal guidance, which is where real transformation can take place. I don't think institutions were meant to bring all individuals up to the spiritual standard. I think it was meant at best to be a container that allows a person to make their journey at their own pace in a particular way.
Yes.
And so
Amen.
I think, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta speaks to this in his Putana essay, where he says that in the material world, the conditioned souls only know preventative systems. They do not have any information about the positive spiritual life. These are Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's words in the Putana essay.
Wow,
and
that's
so
interesting.
the idea that the institutions are like, no to this, no to that, no to that, no to that, that makes sense. That's at least if Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is to be believed. We only know preventative systems. We don't know about the positive spiritual life. The positive spiritual life is meant to be intensely personal. And I think where institutions the world over have failed their constituency is being able to provide more guru figures that can play the role of helping someone upbuild their spirituality from where they're standing. And I feel like Prabhupada himself, at least in his Leela, was a perfect example of that. He gave standards for his society. There has to be boundaries. And I live in New York, so Kishore and I live in New York. We see the wildest you will ever see. Like, New York is insane. And you see the consequence of not having boundaries. It's nasty. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
The city is dirty. I'm not talking only the city, like physically dirty. People's consciousness is foul. Like, and I'm not saying this in a judgmental way. I'm just saying it in an observational way. It's out of control. I'm part of that environment, so I get out of control too when I'm in such an environment. So I'm not judging them in that sense, but it's a discernment. So you see the result of not having strict boundaries in play for conditioned
Yeah.
souls who are only interested in bhukti and therefore only interested in exploiting. You got to put a hard line in the sand. What Prabhupada was good at was providing that structure, the container by which everyone can be upbuilt by giving themselves healthy boundaries. And then he could give personal guidance also. So although this is not all the time maybe accepted or appreciated because you can't find the article in folio, probably it was scrubbed anyway. But there's an example of devotee going to Prabhupada. Like I know there's an example of a trans devotee going to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada saying to the trans devotee, like, just choose one. Not one day man, one day woman. Choose one and like carry on, do bhakti. There's an example of a devotee, I think his name was Uttama something. Shloka, maybe, not the famous Uttama Shloka, the author that's alive today, but another one, where he was like a brahmachari. He's like, Prabhupada, I can't do this. I'm gay and I can't do the brahmachari ashram. And Prabhupada said, find you one nice boy and chant Hare Krishna. So you can take it or leave it. You know, there are going to be different devotees who think that's some sort of justification or whatever. The point I'm making is institutions are only meant to be a container, and then there's supposed to be personal guidance for the upbuild of spiritual life. And that's where the responsibility of the individual is paramount. That you have to take personal responsibility for finding a guru that can uplift you from where you're standing.
Yeah.
He speaks to this in that Putin. Everyone should read the Putin essay. It's like most important. It's a diatribe. It's literally a diatribe of institutions whilst having an institution. But there it says in there also that the guru is able to give unconventional guidance to individuals. So here you have the social culture where there's strict boundaries, and you come out, hey, I'm a little bit outside those boundaries. I'm kind of a freak as far as the social culture is concerned. Well, here comes the guru who can give unconventional guidance for that individual so that they can continue to grow towards their spiritual sadhya. So where I think institutions have failed their constituency is providing of that more personal guidance, like qualified personal guidance. A lot of it has been like superhero culture. And this is not really a criticism, but it's just like an observation where it's like one guru for thousands and thousands of disciples. Obviously, there's going to be plenty of people left in the dust. And so if institutions can do anything better, I wouldn't make a judgment about their boundaries. Like, it is what it is. You know, someone's going to cut this way, someone's going to cut the other way. What we could do better is providing more qualified people to give personal guidance, unconventional guidance when necessary, to uplift the individual from where they're standing. And so I wanted to say that as a defense of the institution as far as their culture, like what can be done? You're going to cut one way or the other. But I also wanted to say as a critique where we're failing to provide deep, nourishing personal guidance.
Yes. I have a few principles in mind to that, but Kishore, please share your thoughts.
Sorry, I know I popped off a lot there.
No, that was great.
It's wonderful. I think it's really interesting, this point around personal guidance, because and
that's where it gets tricky too, right?
That's where it gets tricky too, because it's like a lot of people, well, I have 2 points. One is that in as much, and we already know this, right? But in as much as because identity and identity politics is also like a really tragic thing. Like, I'm just going to say it outright. It's tragic, you know? And the reason it's tragic is because from a spiritual perspective, we understand that, my body is not this identity, you know, and like we're repeated that over and over again in our bhakti, right? You're not the body, you're not the body, you're not the body as such. But people do get disillusioned because yet you see me as the body when I'm this race or when I'm this sexuality or when I'm holding this person's hand and etc. So people rightfully so get disillusioned. But then this point that I wanted to get to is then the gay culture is very much based in identity politics, because I think something that maybe we haven't spoken about yet is like, what is being gay? You know, because there's the aspect of being gay of you are having sex with someone of the same sex. Like there's that like very clear definition. Then there's the whole culture or society around being gay, which has changed over the years, but now it's very like concrete in a sense of what that gay culture looks like. And it's also very much based in identity politics. And so as much as I am identifying with an ism, whether it be gay and this and etc., or whether it be the body, it's like I'm gonna be set up for disappointment, and that ends up happening a lot. And gay devotees then don't know where to go because they're not getting personal spiritual guidance in our society, and then in the gay culture, there's no personal guidance of any sort, if not like where's the next club that we're going to, so
Guidance.
you're kind of just like left in the wind, or like left like a riven cloud, as Jaya was saying, I think in a post somewhere. And it's really unfortunate because I think that guidance, whether it's
unconventional guidance,
whether it's in a spiritual perspective from our standpoint, or even from like a perspective in like more of a secular perspective in the gay world. I remember I had an experience once where I'll share this. It was a funny story. I had an experience once where I wasn't getting the unconventional guidance that I felt that I needed from a secular standpoint because I was going through the transition in my life of taking spirituality very seriously. And I remember I was seeing a therapist at the time, and I was speaking to him. I was just like, yeah, I'm getting into this spiritual tradition. It feels very true to my heart. It feels like what I've been looking for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember I was getting really in my head about, wanting to be single and wanting to follow the 4 regular principles and et cetera and whatever. And the therapist basically was just like telling me how I was wrong in my thinking, how I have to be open, like, sex isn't bad. And, these thoughts that I was having aren't bad. And I'm not saying that they are bad, but he had a very kind of almost like an agenda around like what being gay meant, I remember him telling me like threesomes aren't bad and these thoughts aren't bad. And, like if you want to go out to a party and like whatever, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. And if you want to do drugs, like that's just part of your experience and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, like, and I ended that relationship with that therapist because I was realizing like, wow, like you have this idea of what it means to be like gay, what it means to be gay. And that is very troubling. I think it's very troublesome for a lot of people. And also the last thing I'll say is that gay culture and society, also in defense of our society as well, we haven't necessarily made it easy to be accepted in a sense, and I think that that's something that people don't like.
You haven't made it easy as in you as gay men or gay devotees or whatever?
Gay culture and gay society.
Right.
I've also been on the receiving end of more liberal people in our movement who want to like push the gay agenda or the gay cause forward, specifically in our movement. And it's very cringy because in my opinion, it's just like, well, what exactly is it that you're trying to push forward? Like we really have to break it down to brass tacks. Like, are you talking about a gay culture? Are you talking about 2 gay devotees being together? Are you talking, what exactly are you talking about? As opposed to this like umbrella thing of just like gay people should just be accepted. It's like, I think that's why sometimes people in the society get a little peeved because they see like, what they're seeing is what we're also seeing. We're also seeing the gays in the club. We're also seeing the obnoxious,
the pride parade.
It's like, we're also seeing that. And so it's like, that's what I meant by like, we're not making it necessarily easy.
Yes, because gay culture is probably most famous for its hedonism, right? And that is diametrically opposed to the kind of lifestyle that is most favorable to the cultivation of bhakti. That's basically what it comes down to. I just have, before we get into this this element of like what exactly does it mean to be gay, I just want to say 1 or 2 things. What's that?
We got to explore that question. This is critical.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also ready for it. Just 1 or 2 quick points, just principle based, pertaining to leadership. I don't know who I heard this say. It might have been my Guru Maharaj Mahatma Prabhu, but basically what needs to happen is that any leader who is responsible for people and guiding them needs counseling training. What does being a good counselor mean? It means the ability to listen well. Why do we need to listen to people well? So that we can get a solid sense of where that person is at. Because that's the only thing that really matters. You can only really help somebody from where they are at, right? And so, yes, guru culture, personal care, the actual space to receive unconventional guidance if need be, but that is basically underscored by the ability of the leader to listen well and to genuinely have compassion and wisdom and understanding that this person is where they are, and every single person is in a different place. And to this point, I also mentioned him last week, but Deva Madhava Prabhu comes to mind again. When I tell people about him and about the Harmony Collective, I say Deva Madhava Prabhu is a good leader. Why? Because he takes time to listen to people. His prerogative, his primary mission is to suss out where somebody is at. Like, really, right? Considering his motto, chant and be honest with where you're at, and then we'll take it from there. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, pointing to
I'm going to
leadership.
speak
And
to
then
that also.
yes, and then just one other point, Jai, what you were saying about like the society, the greater society, having its social mores and certain sort of like unchangeable standards. Fine, and perhaps to that we should say that, or we should remind ourselves that there is something like a public identity and a private identity. And perhaps to have the expectation, or to even be entitled, that your private identity should be allowed to be your public identity in any social milieu, that is unreasonable. And I'm preaching to myself right now, because I'm extra in that way. It's like, if I feel like I want to dress this way, showing up to this space because I'm vibing with it, I want to do that. But like, you got to consider this. So public versus private. And it's just like, maybe we all just need to realize that we have a private life to live, and certain things just have to stay there.
Yeah, I want to, yes, maybe to that, but I wanted to come speak to this point about counseling. I'll tell you right now, I will have no percentage more confidence in someone who got a counseling like certificate than I would have.
No, hold on. Sorry. No, it doesn't mean formal training. It means the person should have the developed ability to listen well. It
So
don't
that
matter how
will,
they get
so
it,
such an ability has to be, again, the responsibility of the individual to see for himself. So that's why Shastra has this, it used to have this recommendation that a guru and a disciple should study each other for 1 year. The guru has to study the disciple also has to study the guru. So that responsibility, is this person able to listen, hear me, and accept me from where I'm standing, help me build from where I'm standing? That's going to be something for the individual to, quote unquote, decide for himself. In other words, he has to see if the person he's going to be taking guidance from is able to inspire that faith and that surrender, because of these various abilities that he or she may be having, including the ability to hear, to recognize where I'm at, and to move me forward from where I'm standing. I just wanted to say to that, this is where most of my personal disappointment has come in the society. Again, I don't put, at least I try not to put too much blame or extra responsibility on the society. I think that's impersonal. They're not intended to take up the level of responsibility that individuals tend to impose on the collective like that. So I don't want to do that. But where most of my personal disappointment has come is hearing stories about individual leaders, or frankly, gurus, sannyasis, GBCs in our movement, and hearing their personal guidance to gay men. And that has been the wildest thing that I've ever heard. And I just want to share a few anecdotes, which is like, I mean, it's hilarious as it is tragic, as it is also tragic. But oh my gosh. So anyway, just a couple of stories in this regard. And I'm not going to be dropping names, but I'm talking about some of the people that I'm thinking of when I'm giving these examples, they're like big names in the community. They're big names. They're wonderful, at least in my personal experience of these people, they're wonderful devotees and people, but their guidance in this regard was like the ghetto. So there's a couple of just quick anecdotes, but I remember in Chicago, one of our guys there, he was a 14-year-old boy, maybe 14, 15. So he came out to a few people in the community, and there was a little bit of rah-rah around that. And so at one point, it got to them kind of like trying to give him guidance of how he could get over it, get over the gay thing. It's a phase, pray the gay away, these sorts of things. So he came to me about it, and he didn't know about my psychosexual conditioning. So I revealed it to him. And so he shared a few of the exchanges that he was having with some of the leaders at the time. So I was like, oh, this is not good. So I wrote one of the leaders there at the time, and I was asking questions like, well, can a gay person give class? Can they like cook in the kitchen? Can they serve the deities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And they were like, one of them was just like, no. And the other one was just like, well, I don't know. I guess we'll cross that. What is that bridge when we get there? I was like, you already there, because I'm already on the altar. I'm already giving class. And so we started having an exchange, like a letter exchange. I still have this letter. It's so funny. So the guidance that I was given at that time, it wasn't even guidance. I wasn't looking for guidance, but it was like their thinking around it. This guru, GBC, sannyas, like, they're up there. The guidance that he said is that, well, for such people, the path of immediate transcendence is required. Whereas for the general heterosexual population, they can follow the varnashram system. Whereas for gay people, the path of immediate transcendence. Wait, that was not even the funny part. So the example he gave to me, he said, just like Prabhupada gives the example of the elevator. Some people take the stairs to get to the top, and some people take the elevator to get to the top. So for gay people, they have to take the elevator, and others, they can take the staircase. And so I was like, Maharaj, first of all, the elevator refers to the path of bhakti. And the other methods, as Prabhupada uses that analogy, refers to the karma marg, gyan marg, yoga marg. So this bhakti elevator is for everyone who's got adhikar for bhakti. So that means the gay devotees and the other devotees, we all got adhikar for bhakti because we have some sort of faith. So the elevator is for all of us. Now I need to ask you, who do you know that took the path of immediate transcendence, which is like a retarded term, and was successful? Like in Prabhupada's movement, you had like Higher Griva, you had Sri Dham Prabhu, you had Umapati. Well, he's Prabhu now, but he was Maharaj at one point. Bhavananda Prabhu. And now I'm dropping these names because these are like famous names in the history of ISKCON in this regard. It looked like they kind of tried the path of immediate transcendence, didn't work out. Can we get some better guidance than this? Like, we need better guidance than the path of immediate transcendence. In a more recent story, it was told to me, one devotee, he's from Europe. He was in a relationship at the time with a man, but and everyone in the community kind of knew it, but he wasn't like super open about it, and he was wanting to get initiated. So he went to one particular guru. And the guru just flat out told him, have you seen all of Prabhupada's statements about gay people? I can't initiate you until you give up your relationship with this man and strictly follow the four regular principles. So he, called me and was like very disturbed by that. And this is the wildest one. I got this one from Kishore, but I got to share it. There's one devotee, he went to a very wonderful devotee. I mean, I personally know him. And he went to this devotee and was asked, he's like, listen, I'm conditioned this way. I don't think I can get rid of it, blah, blah, blah. So this devotee, it was more progressive. Like, he's kind of known to be a more progressive guru. He was like, okay, then you should be involved in a relationship. And then he said, listen, I'll agree to initiate you if you agree that you'll only have sex once a month. I'm sorry, just the level of what? It's like, I'm like, okay, so, and I asked, I would ask this particular devotee, first of all, are you giving the same criteria to your heterosexual disciples? Like, second of all, do you really care about what people are doing in the bedroom? I'm a little confused. And what if I can't follow the once a month thing? Then do I like write you like, hey, Gumaraj, so I tried the once a month thing and it's kind of difficult. Could I upgrade it to 2 to 4? I want to chat more rounds. Like, what do you even say to something like that? And so this is where I've experienced like letdown or disappointment. I'm like, okay, the institution can't provide unconventional guidance. We need an individual to do that. But if this is the only type of guidance that's available, got to stick to the standard, no unconventional guidance, then this is where I feel the letdown is profound for an individual. Okay, the society won't accept me, whatever. This individual in whom I place faith, they're giving this sort of guidance. That's where the alienation becomes very profound at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of my personal disappointment has come in regards to this particular issue, and it's how gay men particularly are
Yeah.
yeah. There's loads of anecdotes. There's
more. There's a lot more.
But I had to get that.
Kishore.
Well, he stole one of the anecdotes.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to share it.
We tell each other all the anecdotes that come through. I mean, they're like Jaya was saying, they're tragic and at the same time funny in how ridiculous they are. I know of someone who had to convince their guru of initiating them by promising and signing a document, promising that they can be in a relationship, but they can never consummate that relationship, and had to to convince the guru had to like sign a document and like show this to the guru and etc.
Consummate as it becoming like official.
Yeah, like no, like you could
sex.
Sex. Like you could never have sex. You can have a relationship with another man, but you can never have sex. Like it was written into a document so that the guru could initiate them. And in general, a lot of stories just around, honestly, some of the most tragic stories that we get are from devotees in India, unfortunately.
Yeah, a vast majority of them.
Vast majority. And that's like a whole nother beast in terms of like, where are you going to find that personal guidance? And especially the dramatic westernization culturally of India. It's like, if you don't find that guidance in a societal level, in terms of like my personal shiksha gurus or whoever, it's very easy to fall away. It's very easy to fall away from things. Because at least in the West, we have, like someone was saying, like little pockets in certain areas. But in India, it's very tragic, unfortunately. Like people, and that's the saddest part. It's like a lot of these people are dealing with thoughts of, extreme depression, thoughts of suicide, thoughts of just like absolute alienation, like Jai was saying, and not feeling like they fit anywhere, not feeling like they fit in the spiritual realm, obviously not feeling like they fit in the heterosexual realm, and even in the gay culture realm, which we haven't even gotten into yet. It's like they don't see themselves fitting there either. So it's very sad. Yeah.
Okay, now is the time for what exactly does it mean to be gay? I said to John Kishore before that the very first line of this podcast is men rising up, right? So like male body, but completely different inclination sexually. And I also would, and this is primarily up to you guys to unpack, since the subjective experience lies primarily with you, but also just like the element of, on a more subtle level, like that interplay between masculine and feminine energy. Like, can a gay man strongly embody masculine energy? What does that mean? Or perhaps is the embodiment more of the feminine energy, and what would be the value either way? But okay, first, essential, like distilled essence of like, what does it mean to be gay?
I think simply and essentially it means the psychosexual attraction to the same gender or sex. Like, I think if we were to provide like a straightforward, simple definition, it's a psychosexual attraction to the same sex.
Straightforward definition, but nowadays there's a whole subsect of men who identify as culturally or whatever as straight, but they have sex with men.
Yeah,
and there's
they
like
gay.
yeah, in my
They
opinion, and this is like a new phenomenon. It's very interesting, actually. But in my opinion, yeah, they're gay. I would define being gay as Jaya has said, but I think that as society gets more convoluted in identity politics, the answer to that would be more complicated.
I think so this I had this kind of as the first point in my little notepad here, little note sheet. And where I think a lot of confusion comes up is between homosexuality and homosex. These two are really conflated. So as soon as you mention homosexuality, it means homosex. Like people's minds immediately go to like sodomy, basically, when you mention homosexuality. And so, and this is related to the question of choice, or is it nature or is it nurture? So, and of course, if it's nature, you can't help it. And if it's nurture, no, if it's nature, I was born this way. And if it's nurture, it's a choice. And so I think, yeah, just a little bit of conversation around that. I do have something to say on that. First of all, the nature versus nurture subject matter, I think, is an interesting one, because a lot of people who don't experience this sort of psychosexual conditioning, and again, when I say the word condition, sometimes people get triggered by saying the word conditioning in this context, because then it sounds like you're saying gay people have like a condition, like a disease. And I'm sure like maybe people with a more conservative politics or something like, yeah, he said it right. He said it right. When I say condition, I mean all souls are agendered. The soul doesn't have a gender. And according to the configuration of the psyche, you're moving this, you're called this male or female, or your attraction is this or that way. So the soul is conditioned by the psychophysical apparatus. We call it as the upadi. Yeah. So when we say the word condition, that's what we mean. We don't mean it's like a disease or something.
Yeah, so, I just want to say conditioning means karmic package in this lifetime, basically, right? Yes.
So is it nature or is it nurture? So nature means that from the very outset of your birth, you already have a fixed swabhava that you're not able to get out of in that particular life. It's like the vehicle that you're driving that particular life. You can purify it. Like if your apple has, dark spots and worms on it, you can remove the worms, you can remove the dark spots, but an apple isn't going to become an orange. You got the nature that you got in this particular life. And Krishna speaks to this in Gita in many places. Even for a man of knowledge, he has to act according to the nature that it's been provided for him by Prakriti. Many verses are there like this. So some people say, well, it's not nature. No one's born that way. It's not nature. It's a choice. And so with that, I think a lot of how people set up the social culture is based on their understanding of this particular topic. If it is a choice, then you have to have strong rules that prevent people from making such a choice. But it's all based on the idea that homosexuality as a nature part is not on the table. It's just their men are always attracted to women, but by choice, they're choosing to be licentious in this particular way. So, and therefore it's sin, and therefore it's degrading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I always like to make a clarification that, number one, first of all, it is nature. At least in my own lived experience, if I'm to be believed. Now people are coming. And this is something I find very interesting, is that if you ask people devotees, I mean devotees in this context, if you ask them to provide you pramanams for some of their, what comes off as homophobic convictions, they cannot provide you any pramanam for it, like zero. They have one statement of Prabhupada's in the third canto, which we could probably get to, but it's not a praman. That's just a sentence. They can provide you no evidence. And then when you try to explain, well, no, this is nature, then they'll start saying, well, actually what it is that, they injected some frogs with this thing and they can make frogs gay. So what they've been doing is putting things in the water, and you hear the wildest shit. And what I find interesting about that is that devotees will take, because they can't provide scriptural praman, then they'll be glad to embrace some of these other things in the secular world that support their position, which may be patently homophobic or at least appearing to be so. But there is no pramatum for it. So if a person's lived experience is to be taken as true, then it's certainly nature. And I always say, which of us would have chose to be in a position where we had to experience like utter shame and to simulate this conditioning because we felt we were going to be Alex Jones, but which one of us would choose this? Now, I don't think that there's a exact difference between nature and nurture also. So because what we call as swabhava or nature is the accumulation of some scars that are concretized in this particular life to become our nature. And those some scars are based on modes of thinking and modes of acting in previous life. So in a sense, we've nurtured a way of thinking and a way of being previously that is concretized as a particular nature in this particular life. So in that sense, there's a nurture element to it that's not based on this life, though. It's based on previous lives, who knows from where from. So the nature nurture topics is not so black and white in that particular sense, at least in my thinking about it. And I do think what's happening in the social culture, the postmodern social culture, is that they are degrading people's taste with pornography and the hypersexualization that is experienced in social media. There's something very like demonic about it, where they're like nurturing a certain mentality and certain behavior that may not actually be based on a person's nature, but an acquired taste. And I think when people speak about homosexualities as a sort of acquired taste, I don't think in all cases they're completely off the mark in that regard. When it comes to certain just cultural things that are taking place. But again, if a person's lived experience is to be taken as true, then there's certainly a nature part to it. There's a homosexuality part. And whether or not you do homosex is a behavior thing. That part you can control to whatever degree you can control it. You're largely going to be unsuccessful maybe, but you can control that part. But the nature that you got, that's the nature that you got this life. It's nothing you can really do about that. So, okay, that's all my notes about this particular thing, because this is also for the secular world, this is a mystery. They can't find the psychosexual conditioning in the genes or in the sort of empirical elements of the body. So it's a mystery why this comes up, and not only amongst humans but amongst animals also. It's greatly a mystery. So we say like this: Swabhava is there, nature is there, and okay. So I said all I had to say on that particular thing.
Yeah. Thanks for the theoretical context. I have a particular sort of direction here, but Kishore, thoughts?
That was my answer to what it is to be gay.
That was a very theoretical answer.
Extensive.
It's practical.
No, it's good. It's
psychosexual attraction to a man, which is a nature thing.
Yeah,
the nature thing is not completely separate from the nurture thing, but it's a nature thing, and and therefore there's a distinction between sexuality and the behavior and all that. They're very practical.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good conceptual framing. Let me just like bring in the experiential perspective, as Jai and I usually tend to do, conceptual and experiential divide. Like on an experiential level, I mean, I would say whether it be nature or nurture, whether it be like a fundamental swabhava conditioning karmic package you have in this lifetime, you want to have sex with men, whether it be that or the more sort of like, conditioning of the environment, all these very interesting far out narratives that we see like pervading Western society now. On an experiential level, what it really boils down to is if a particular desire or inclination keeps appearing in your consciousness relentlessly and doesn't leave you alone and keeps just like gnawing at you, there comes a certain point where that is very, very difficult to ignore. One is afflicted, This is. I guess I'm just speaking to the nature of desire, and I feel like we got to deal with those things that come up for us in hopefully as wholesome a way as possible. Anyway, just a quick point. Kishore, thoughts?
I'm really interested in Madhavapuri's question that he's asking, because I think it ties into everything that we're speaking about, because In terms, yeah, it's a really, he says, are there specific sexual behavioral instructions for a grahasta devotee in Shastra? Does it specifically say monogamous sexual relationship only for procreation? I'm asking because I'm failing with the only for procreation part. I mean, I'm good with monogamy. Really enjoying this talk. Thank you. Jai, is there anywhere specifically in Shastra? I don't know, in Kapila Dev teachings or no, yeah, I don't,
Not the scriptures that we engage with.
I didn't think so. I didn't think there's anything like specific.
Yeah.
But that's because the scriptures that we engage with are
not dealing
decidedly unconcerned about the karmic world for the most part.
Yeah. There is, something interesting as ISKCON is kind of like establishing its social culture over the decades, still relatively being a very young movement. It's interesting how we have, if we're gonna talk about Varnashram, then we need to start talking about like Varnashram Shastra, we need to start talking about like the Shastras that give instructions pertaining to all different like modes, or let's say categories of being when it comes to a human being's conditioning. It's like there is such a vast array of Vedic literatures dealing with literally every subject matter. If we want to know about sex, then we need to go and read the Shastras that talk about sex and try and give us like good instruction how to most wholesomely approach sex. If we want to deal with economic development, we have to go to the Artha Shastras. But we have zero culture of doing that, or going in that direction. It's like, I'm just thinking about my Guru Maharaj, Mahatma Prabhu. Maybe like a decade or two ago, he realized that there's a whole lot of psychological stuff in our society. People are going through serious psychological things, blocking them from being able to be truly spiritual. So what did he do? He went on an extensive research mission, mostly into Western literature, actually, like Western psychological self-help literature. Like, how do you deal with certain psychological things? So many people are attracted to Mahatma Prabhu because that is what he does. He speaks about managing your emotions. It's practical, it's necessary. People are traumatized, they got things to deal with. Anyway, so the point is like, we need to start looking a little bit wider. And I'm becoming aware of certain devotees of my generation doing so, and the sense of kind of contentment and integration coming into their lives, just like dealing with things that are real and practical for them with where they're at right now. And it's like, so that is a really important thing. Okay, that's my point. Now, coming to this, I think key point of like sex for procreation, because that is the essential distinction between gay sex and heterosex. It's like this is our absolute ideal, sex for procreation. Now, Jai and I, we led an initiative last year with some other devotees, as we also actually again mentioned in our previous episode, where we set up a questionnaire and we sent it out into the public space to figure out like where are devotees truly at sexually, because we're getting the sense that sex for procreation ain't flying for the vast majority of people, and yet it still is this like, it is this very like overtly expected ideal. This is what you should go for. If you're not going for this, you're falling short. And yes, sure, conceptually, ideally, yes, that is true, right? And why? Because sex is an incredibly absorbing, intense, sensual, pleasurable experience. So if you have too much of it, you're just going to want more of it, and you're going to struggle to cultivate the more subtle experience of spirituality, of the different angas of bhakti. Okay, we all understand that. But at the same time, it's like, we have to be real with where people are at. Now, if most straight people, straight devotees, are failing to have sex only for procreation, and that is basically an established fact that most spiritual masters and leading gurus are aware of, because it is revealed in private spaces. It's like, why the hell are we so down on gay people? Like, come on. People are going to have sex. They're going to have sex. You can't stop them. And it's every person's own prerogative and decision to what extent they're going to be, engaging in their sexual life and how that balances out with their spiritual endeavors. So it's like let's respect the ideal, but at the same time, come on, there can't be this. We got to get real. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think the obsession with people's sex lives is something that's really simultaneously fascinating and absurd, because I think that it's like how, this point that Jaya brought up about, well, you can be gay and have a boyfriend or whatever partner, that a guru in our movement said, but you can only do like once a month like this, right? And it's like it's just so absurd, because I really appreciate your points around this Kerner avatar, that like, yeah, it's people have been having it for millennia. You're not going to stop it. And there is an understanding, like there is an understanding that regulation makes sense, right? It's like, if I'm doing this constantly all the time, it's going to take me away from like my spiritual goals. But at the same time, when we know that for heterosexuals, when it's pretty well known, even though people don't like to say it, perhaps only behind closed doors people will say it, but it's pretty well known in our movement that like the vast majority of people are not like, not what's it called, fitting the bill. Yeah, fitting the bill with one of the regulative principles around like this highest form of sex being for procreation only. And it's so interesting about this sex point specifically, because the gay experience in terms of like, okay, I'm gay, I have attraction, that's there. And it's almost like people can, and in our society as well, I've seen this anecdotally, people can kind of not get behind, but they can kind of accept like, okay, you have gay attraction, whatever, that's fine. But when it comes to like the actual, like, now I have a partner, now I have a husband, now I have a boyfriend, whatever it might be, and of course the other person's mind goes to like, okay, that must mean that now sex is happening. That's the real like breaking point that it seems to be, of like, well, that's the incorrect thing, that's the wrong thing. And it's just wildly fascinating to me, because I don't want to share my own like guidance that I've gotten around this, because I don't like to so much on a public sphere. But it's really interesting to me that people are so obsessed with people's sex lives. It's like, maybe we should be obsessed with our, bhakti and our relationship with Krishna. Like, maybe that's a better obsession to have.
Exactly. That's what I was saying earlier about glass half full, right? Like, let's focus on the positive.
It's not that, how when you're on book distribution and you meet someone like who's like out partying, you try to distribute to them a book, and then suddenly they become Christian on you. And they're like, well, what about Jesus? And then they start wanting to preach to you. And I was like, you over here wilding out drinking, and now you want to be Christian because I showed you the Bhagavad Gita. So I feel like it's something similar with like the gay thing. Like, no one actually cares about the sex life part so much until the gay thing is brought up. And then suddenly it's like this weird preoccupation with it. It like suddenly comes up, or it becomes like a weird thing. And again, the reason I went through that whole little analysis is because I think it speaks to people's understanding around if it's nature or nurture. It speaks to people's conflation of homosex and homosexuality. And so I don't know if people really had the conviction that this was a psychosexual conditioning, then the homosex part makes sense. Because, well, that's how you're psychosexually conditioned. So naturally, you're going to do what is natural for that conditioning. But if you don't actually believe that such a condition is true, then you're like, oh, I got to protect this guy from sin, from ruining his life, because this is unnatural. It's not natural for them to do that. And so it speaks to a sort of like an understanding of the ontology of, like, ontology is playing a role in how people deal with this subject matter and how they view people who are psychosexually conditioned in this way, how they deal with gay people.
I mean, to me, it's just like the idea that anyone would still think that it's a choice is so absurd to me that I it's like I can't even like entertain it.
Well, why is it
It's like
absurd? Why is it
It's
absurd?
it's
It's not like
absurd
this is
because
something that's exactly talked about or super clear, or secularly speaking. Like no one knows why
you
it
know
comes
why
up
it's
in the
absurd. You
secular
know
way.
why it's absurd. I'll tell you why. Go ask gay people. Go ask them if it's a choice. They'll tell you that it's not a goddamn choice.
So
It's
that was my
obviously
simple argument, but
it's obviously a damn hard life to live. Why the hell would you choose to live on like the rejected fringes of society where you have no place? Why the fuck would anyone choose that, you know? It's retarded to think that it's a choice, in my
that was
opinion.
my argument previously. But there was this political commentator. I think his name is Milo Yiannopoulos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of like, I think he became a little bit popular in 2016 or something like that because he was like a gay Republican basically. And so that was like such a strange thing to see at that time. So he kind of blew up a little bit. And then I think he fell in disgrace because he talked about some really weird shit with children and that ended that thing. But recently he came out as straight. Now, if anyone has actually seen his personality, like
Damn it, Milo.
Milo is like one of those persons. Well, this is some language that you'll catch in the gay community, but you would clock him a mile away, like like the way, like his mannerisms, and you would literally clock him a mile away. So he comes out as straight, and so his explanation to why people were into gay sex is like a bad habit that they picked up somewhere along the line. And so my point is, whether you accept it or not, the very fact of the matter is there's an ontological aspect to this that leads to people leaning this way or that way in that sort of conversation. And when you don't have scriptures providing pramanas, or let's say like in the case of the Middle Eastern traditions, when you do have very clear pramanas about this sort of stuff, well, not about where it comes from, but at least what you should do with people who engage in the behavior stuff. They have very clear pramanas. So if they take their scripture as pramana, it makes sense why people would think this particular way. And when you go to the secular world and they have no clue why it comes up, they haven't figured out anything empirically, like scientifically or so on. It's not to me that wild of a jump that people would think this is a choice.
Okay, so then it's like, in the empirical world, we have quantitative research and we have qualitative research. Quantitative research pertains to like hard data, science, hard science. Qualitative research, especially like, grounded theory, is like ask people questions, like inquire extensively, deeply into the experience of people who are doing this thing and just look at the stats. It's simple. It's simple.
I
you
wish,
know
I'm pushing, I'm not really against this, obviously, because I have my own lived experience, which is more than enough evidence for me. But I'll just give a sort of a social phenomenon that's coming up now. The amount of young people coming out as trans, it's very, to me, it's kind of like frightening because, it's like, where did so many trans people come from? They literally went from being like such a small percentage, which I still think that they are, now being the buzz of the time. You have especially women coming out talking about they're trans, and it's more and more numbers. Are we to just believe that? Okay, yes, let's just believe that. But then now these same people who are coming out trans is a huge community of detransitioners saying that actually I was quite confused about my experience. And so therefore the qualitative research, as you say, isn't getting the esteem that maybe it should get in these sorts of conversations, because people's experiences cannot necessarily be dependent upon as absolute truth or absolute reality concerning a particular issue. So all I'm saying is I guess I try to take the empathetic position of why people would think differently around like why this might be a choice, especially if they don't have a person in their life that they love that's gay and they themselves are not going through that. As a third party person looking in, I can get why they will be confused and about the subject matter and movement. I totally like
Yeah, sure.
that position.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure. I hear you conceptually.
I wanted to make a quick comment on that because I think that I agree with Jai completely on this one. It's like I get it, like it can be confusing for people because I think that I guess the place that I'm coming from is that from the gay agenda side or gay culture side, there's this want or platform that we should be accepted everywhere, no matter what. And that's what the platform is.
Yeah. That
And
sense of entitlement.
it's just like,
Really?
it's like, have you gone around the world? Have you been in other cultures? Have you seen things? It's like I remember when I was living in India, and this was before I formally became a devotee or whatever. I was living in India, and I was just like, yeah, I know when to code switch. I know that I shouldn't be overtly whatever here. My family's from Latin America. It's clear that in certain aspects and places in society, you need to hide certain aspects of yourself or don't other aspects of yourself. And the question comes then in regards to it being an agenda, and it being, because this is a whole nother thing that I don't know if we have time to get into, but I really believe that there is a lot of, just underneath all of this agenda and all agendas in general, there's something sinister there. It's like, how could it be that all of a sudden there's this just massive gay agenda that is partnered with all these capitalistic giants? It's very, from an outside perspective, it's like, this seems off. Something seems off about this, And so when it comes to being accepted everywhere at all times, it's like, that's not going to happen, And I think that the more that people can cope with that reality, it brings, in my lived experience, and I've also seen it in others, that brings more solace than, no, I have to fight and I have to be accepted everywhere I go and it has to be like this. Knowing that self-validation, and also knowing that the material world is essentially a broken place, that we're not going to fix it, because I think that a lot of people have that misconception, a lot of secular people
totally
we're gonna fix things all of a sudden. And it's like,
totally.
No, just have your pocket, be satisfied with yourself, have a few people around you that you feel loved by and accepted by, and boom, that's it, Of course, with social media, it's like, we were never meant to live this way, where we're broadcasting our lives to hundreds of thousands of people all the time, and it creates almost this blanket agenda that it has to be accepted across the globe. And it's like,
so basically, Kishore, self-acceptance key, Jai. That's pretty much what it comes down to. You got to learn to be okay with yourself, right? That's where it begins.
Self-acceptance key, Jai. And also find your people, find your people, do what you got to do. Find 100%. Your people who love and accept you, and be there, and that's it.
Find your tribe. For sure. So Kishore has to be off. I have one or two more things that I that we just need to touch on very briefly. Kishore, thank you so much for giving us your time. It was a really lovely, dynamic discussion, and I'm very grateful for your contribution.
Thank you all so much, and I'll see you soon.
Peace.
Alrighty. Jai, I just Jai, just a quick something that I'd like to bring to the table, just pertaining to this, whether gay or straight, this whole sex for procreation thing, where exactly is the line? The fact of the matter is that most people don't do it. It's most straight people don't do it. So why are we so hard on the gays? What? For me, it's I really just think it's important to work with the reality. And in my personal opinion, I'm not saying that it should be societally accepted, this should become the new standard. But what makes sense to me is restrict sex to committed relationships. Because what is the essential principle? That you are willing to accept meaningful responsibility for the well-being of another, especially if you're going to be deriving such intense pleasure and satisfaction that is very complicated on a psycho-emotional level from their body. You should be willing to make sacrifices for that person, to act selflessly towards them. So it's I feel if you want a standard, to me, in my opinion, that's a good standard. Stick to sex in committed relationships. Obviously, casual sex it's basically mutual exploitation. You're not willing to accept any meaningful responsibility for that person, make any sort of commitment to them. I feel commitment is the symbol of the willingness to be responsible not only for yourself but also for another person. And that I think is like the essential principle, you know. Anyway, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think most will be amenable to that. And at least in this postmodern religious world, then they would be amenable to such a principle.
Jai.
Now it's just about as an individual experience, it's just kind of unlearning the sort of shame that has come with growing up
Oh
in
yeah.
traditional sort of
Oh
social
yeah.
understanding.
Which again also is like, that is personal responsibility. Like every human being is responsible for their own existence. It's like, shit's gonna happen to you, you're gonna get traumatized, that's gonna happen. But unless you take responsibility for that, you are dooming yourself. You are dooming yourself to dysfunction. That is the hard truth. So we have to deal with our own guilt and shame and trauma and all of these things to come to a point of real self-acceptance. It's our responsibility. So it's like, you know, that's the harmony.
Yes.
Haribo.
You asked a
Okay,
final
well,
point. I was going to say, are you? I guess I'll put it out here in the podcast itself, but I know once a month you're meeting with Arise, with some guys and holding some
yeah.
space for guys. So I was thinking also I can do, because the question has come up a few times in the course of this podcast. Where do you go for like community and guidance on this sort of thing? So I was thinking,
Ah,
Kishore and I have talked about it before also, but
yeah.
holding maybe you do it once a month. Also, we were thinking to do once a month for men. Maybe I'm thinking about the women, because women experience their sexuality very different than men. The gay experience and the lesbian experience is like in some ways worlds apart from each other, just
Yes.
like viscerally. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I'm putting it out there for gay men or bi men or whatever who would appreciate more community. I don't know, maybe they can DM me on Messenger or maybe on Instagram.
Mm.
You can DM me, and we'll do once a month a meeting to have community and get guidance, or at least
Yeah.
get conversation around
Yeah.
being religious and pursuing Krishna, but also having to deal with ourselves empirically and how to grow from that. So I
Yeah.
want to
This,
put that out
this,
there. Once
yeah.
a
Thanks,
month, you can
Jai.
DM
That,
in. I'll post the dates on Messenger and Facebook soon.
That's incredible. I'm so happy to hear you say that. And just like, you know, just as a really final thing, this principle of intentional small groups that are spaces of safety, confidentiality, where you can really come and just be fully who you are and talk about your struggles. You know, as Jai's mentioning, he started that group back in, 2020, even before it was in a different shape. This kind of like men's support group vibe, and guys coming and really just being able to talk about stuff, such a powerful thing. And that's even what gave rise to this podcast. We've just kind of got the the group going again. We're going to be meeting soon. So anyway, just like, that's an important principle. Please, like, take note and apply that principle, in your own ways, wherever you are creating those safe spaces. All right. We're not at this moment in time certain about our next episode or when exactly it will be, but expected like somewhere in the next month at least. Yeah, thank you for the support, everyone that's been here. Madhavapuri and Prem Vilas. Who else was here? Rudolph. Thank you so much. We really appreciate y'all.
Om Tat Sat.
Hare Krishna.